Okay, the meeting will come to order. Ms. Watkins, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Miller,
Here?
Ms. O'Connor,
Here?
Ms. Honeycutt,
Here.
Ms. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Davenport,
Here.
Mr. Patterson,
Howdy. No, here.
Mr. Crute.
Thank you very much. The next item of business is the approval of the agenda. The agenda has been distributed. Are there any corrections? Do I have a motion to adopt, please?
I'll make the motion to adopt the agenda.
Okay, it's been a motion and seconded by voice acclamation. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. The next item of business is the consideration and adoption of the minutes. The minutes have been distributed. Are there any corrections?
Yes. My last name is spelled O''Connor. It's in here both ways, sometimes with an ER at the end, sometimes with an OR, but the OR one is the correct one, thanks.
We just thought that was your alias.
Well, it's become a problem when the deed for my land was misspelled, and now my tax records are misspelled, and it's a pain. So I'm trying to get it right everywhere.
That's true, that's true. With that correction, are there any other corrections? Any other revisions? With that correction, do I have a motion to adopt the minutes with that correction?
So move.
Is that a second? Okay. By voice acclamation, all those who approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. The next item of business is public participation. Mr. Pambit, have there been any speakers who signed up?
No, sir.
Okay. The next item of business then is the public hearing. Since there are none scheduled, we'll proceed to the staff updates. And I just wanted to say before we get into those, for those folks who are joining us on Facebook or online, we apologize that you're not able to view the PowerPoint. I've been told that the software just doesn't allow for that to happen, but if anyone online would like a summary of the slides, please contact me or Mr. Pambit, and we can summarize those for you. But we'll try to summarize them as part of the discussion as we go along.
Thank you. So I'll just briefly go through some of the staff updates. You commissioners had in your packets the monthly department report. So again, that department report, it's got some qualitative information in terms of what we've been doing from a training standpoint and some other activities in the department, but then you also have some statistics on permit approvals, fab ridership, and sales at the airport. We're also currently taking applications for the building official. So as you may be aware, Philip Moore officially left Town of Farmville employment back in the fall, but has been working with us 2 days out of the week as an employee of Prince Edward County. But we are currently taking applications for building official. We reposted that 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and we've gotten several applications. We'll leave that open for another couple of weeks, and then we'll go through the applications and determine who we will interview. But we will provide certification training program for the right uncertified candidate, although our preference would be to find someone who's ready to go right out of the door. And again, that will be open until filled. The Board of Zoning Appeals will be meeting on, actually next Thursday, April 28th. As you know, their meetings are even less frequent than the Planning Commission, but they will be hearing a sign variance for a site here in town. That is next Thursday, April 28th at 3 p.m. here in the council chamber. So that is a daytime meeting. An important one for us here on the staff, we are doing a development processes information session on May 19th, and that is a Thursday morning. That'll be Thursday, May 19th from 9 to 12, and there's going to be some time built in for questions and answers, but I expect that the staff will be presenting for about a couple of hours anyways. The session is free, but it's limited to 25. That's based off of the room size, so it will be here on the second floor in the Emergency Operations Center up here behind the council chambers. We do have 14 slots still available, so we'd like to encourage anyone online or even commissioners who are interested in kind of hearing how we want the processes to play out from here on out. There are some slots available. So if you want to RSVP, contact Michelle Watkins at 392-8465, or you can email her at mwatkins@farmvilleva.com. So it is the first such session that we've had since the adoption of the zoning and subdivision ordinance in June of 2020. Based off of some feedback that I've received from really stakeholders across the board, planning commissioners certainly had some things to say. My first meeting, or actually the public hearing that we had a couple months ago, builders, applicants, property owners who have come in for a variety of inquiries. This session has been generally well received in terms of this is something that we need. So there is a lot more communicating that needs to be done and informing left to do. What this session is really about is the application process and how we review things and how we want to document our reviews and the information that we take in. There are going to be some things that we won't be able to cover, but we do want to acknowledge up front that, you know, people might have questions about starting a new business. How do you go through the business license process? Food trucks, short-term rentals. So when we talked a couple of months ago about accessory dwellings, there were some I guess, oblique references to short-term rentals and that kind of thing. So Farmville does have a short-term rental ordinance. That is one of the things that we need to formalize in terms of a process. So while we have an ordinance, it needs to be administered. So what we're doing is we're considering some semi-annual sessions that may be done once every 4 to 6 months, but one session is not going to be enough to fully explain the zoning ordinance. But for this first session, we're really going to be talking about your more routine inquiries. How do I get a permit for a deck? How do I get a permit for a new house? Things like that. How do I split one lot into 2? Or one parcel into 30? How do I rezone a piece of property? Those are the kinds of questions that we want to answer on May 19th. So again, May 19th, Thursday, from 9 to 12, contact the department if you'd like to RSVP. This next item is under staff updates. Much like, as I mentioned, we've been going through the zoning ordinance and trying to figure out how we're going to administer a lot of this. But in doing that and in receiving a lot of questions from applicants, we have noticed some things that the staff feels could be changed about the zoning and subdivision ordinance. So there is a significant list of changes. I will mention that this activity is going to be a pretty heavy lift because we're talking about currently 1.5 pages of just a bullet point list of changes that we think need to be made. And I will say that the consultant did have the easy part. So they come in, they propose an ordinance, and then they leave town. Now, those of us who are here in Farmville, we're the ones who have to implement that ordinance. So that is what I would consider a much more in-depth exercise because we have to be consistent in what we do. We have to be able to properly document our decisions and make sure that we can defend those decisions. With that being said, we're here on April 20th. The staff is recommending that you hold a May 18th meeting, so that's Wednesday, May 18th, as a work session so that we can present our list to you. and just kind of give you an idea of some of the things that we need to amend about the ordinance. There are no major land use applications for the Planning Commission to consider, so no rezonings, no conditional use permits, anything like that. So that session or that meeting can be dedicated to kind of introducing you to the issues. We're prioritizing that list. We're breaking them out into blocks. And the first block of amendments, staff wants to have those done by September 1, and Cameron can kind of speak to this a little bit, or knows a whole lot about it. But one of the things that we need to do in order to coordinate efforts with the Moton Museum is to implement a civil rights overlay district, what we're calling a civil rights gateway overlay district. That's so that the Moton Museum can achieve its World Heritage Site status. We have been receiving a lot of sign variance applications. We've received 3 since the zoning ordinance has been adopted, and we consider that a significant amount. So we've analyzed the sign ordinance and would like to make some common sense changes so that we can maybe receive less variance applications while still trying to keep our gateways and our business areas more small town feel as opposed to your standard commercial corridor feel. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of staff updates. I know that I had mentioned the Civil Rights Gateway. Cam, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so Moton has been in the process of going through the World Heritage designation process. We are working with 13 other civil rights sites across the South to submit a joint serial nomination. World Heritage status is the highest form of historic designation that a site can receive. And there are no guarantees with the World Heritage process, but we certainly think that we have a strong case to make in connection with those 13 other sites. And so, as we go through this process, we know the museum site itself is heavily protected via, so the museum site is heavily protected, and I forget via an easement, and via our National Historic Landmark designation status. But the thing that we are working on as part of this overlay district is to look at the buffer zones that surround the museum site to ensure that we protect that buffer zone, to ensure that the museum, its sightlines, et cetera, remain in good enough condition to move forward with this effort. So excited to be working with the town on this effort, and I know at some point it will come before this body and come before town council.
And if I'm correct, this is, the overlay district is, what we're talking about is congruent with what is already in the comprehensive plan. I mean, I don't think it goes by this exact name, but I think it fits. This is part of the plan that we had kind of passed and that we had imagined, correct?
That's correct, sir. In the comprehensive plan, there is a specific small area study or small study area for the Moton Museum. It's a very small area, but you're exactly right. The comprehensive plan speaks directly to protecting that historic area. Now, one thing about overlay districts is that the sites will still retain their underlying zoning, but this is an additional level of regulation intended to, again, protect exactly what Cam said, sight lines, some of the areas directly surrounding. So just as a preview, I think we're all familiar with the site, but those of the people who aren't familiar with the Moton Museum, you've got Longwood immediately to the north. you've got a shopping center to the west, to think that you've got a funeral home across the street, and the shopping center actually wraps around to the south as well. So while that area is already heavily developed, this overlay district could look to the future for any future development that might occur in that area. So we're actually looking at some examples, some templates from other sites that have similar protection zones or for overlay districts.
Thank you for the clarification. Cam, I kind of hear things just second and third hand. And again, I'm not trying to short circuit the process or be unnecessarily hasty, especially with the processes and public input. But is September, is that going to be sufficient enough time? Is that when we're saying that we're aiming to have this done by September?
Yeah.
Is that going to be okay in terms of timeline for the application for everybody else? Okay. Thank you. The other question I had was, I'm excited to hear about some of these recommendations for the May 18th meeting. Now, when you say work session, is that, do you anticipate us just kind of going through and talking about that and not making any votes or recommendations? Or like, how are you imagining the difference between a work session and a regular meeting?
I just say work session in the context that, much like tonight, we're really not performing any business other than talking about some of the ethics material that was presented. When I say work session, I'm really just intending to give you a list of the of the sections that we feel need to be amended, and some rationales, and from there, one of the things that the Planning Commission could do is set its own priorities in terms of what could be the first block of amendments, second and third, because we're really talking about so far a page and a half. So I think that in order for me to properly introduce this, I would need basically a block of time to just talk about it. So it would still be held here in a quote-unquote regular meeting, but much like what we're doing tonight, we're just using it as a time to talk specifically about this. Yeah.
I think just kind of going back to the sign ordinance, I know that sitting in on the Board of Zoning Appeals, we've had a request come before the group. So it's interesting to hear that it's picked up, but I'm glad that things are being analyzed. Sounds like it's not going to be any recommendations that would drastically alter things, but maybe just a few tweaks here and there.
That's what I'm looking at. The sign ordinance, especially in the B3 area, is incredibly restrictive, especially when it comes to anchor tenant sized buildings. So when we're talking about quote unquote big box buildings, when one is limited to 25 square feet, that looks incredibly small on a really large building. Now, what I want to do is to balance the need for more reasonable signage with the, with the community identity and placemaking, efforts of Farmville. So we all like to say that Farmville is a small town. We want it to remain a small town. And we don't want our corridors to be overwhelmed with signage. But when you look at what's out there and what the current ordinance requirements are, I think that we could probably make some common sense tweaks to give the business owners what they want while not completely giving away the farm. Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
I just want to say, love the workshop series that you're putting together. Other than attending, if there's anything we can do to support that, just let us know.
Sherry, from the real estate perspective, what have you heard or people kind of, has the word gotten out amongst, the folks that you work with? Or are people excited about it, or?
They are excited about it because it's opened up an avenue for them to express their opinions. And that's been, and it's not so much the realtors, it's the public. They're disappointed that most people don't come out to the public hearings, but I say, well, you haven't shown up, so you can't complain. But it does give them an avenue to express themselves.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate you and doing this and your staff doing this and putting this together for us and for the public. Our next item of business, is our new business, and that's, well, we have no old business, so the next item of business is the new business, and that's, yes, Ms. Honeycutt.
I don't know if this comes under old or new, but I think we've discussed this before. So just tell me where it goes. Sure. What do we do about houses that are in such a state of disrepair that something needs to be done with or to them? I think you know a specific house that I'm talking about. I don't know if I should name the house, but is there some route that can be taken to address a situation? I think the town has already mentioned something to the homeowner, but nothing is ever done. It's got peeling paint, the grass is long, there's equipment outside the house, it just stays there, windows are broken. It devalues the properties around it, and it doesn't look like anything's really being done to address the unsightliness and the possible entry of vermin that runs in and out of the property. It's an unsafe place.
So every community has a property or several properties like that. What you're describing is a code enforcement issue, and I suspect, based off of what you just said, that this is a property that has been brought up in the past, either through some sort of complaint form or a mention to the staff. But again, without knowing the specific piece of property that you're talking about, we do take those on a case-by-case basis, and depending on the severity of the violation, we can do everything from talk to the property owner all the way up to issue notices of violation. Now, it's my understanding that Farmville has a property maintenance code. Property maintenance code talks about things like peeling paint and broken windows and things of that sort. But if maybe we could talk afterwards, or you could let me know which piece of property. I'll talk with Philip Moore about it and see, okay. Just check into the history of of the property that you're talking about.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying on that question. I guess if the public has, concerns, I guess they can contact your office as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
I guess since we're on the topic of property maintenance and code enforcement, we are in springtime, and by and large, the most frequent complaint that we get is about tall grass. So we certainly go out there and we try to be proactive about that. But on the flip side, I want the property owners to be proactive and to keep their properties maintained, keep their grass below. Well, I think that the ordinance here is either 10 or 12 inches, but really the expectation here in town is that you keep your properties maintained, free of debris, and just well organized. Yeah. So again, we do drive around, we do look at that, and we don't have the manpower or the staffing to address everybody who's got tall grass. So if you've got tall grass and you get a notice, then you've got basically 10 days to get that cut, or else we'll cut it for you. And we'll charge you for it.
I think I saw you walking around my neighborhood with a ruler measuring my grass the other day.
Not quite, but But we will be rotating through that responsibility until we get a building official, and essentially that person will also be code enforcement. But we do have a template that it is a stick that's got a tick mark measured at 12 inches or 10 inches, and if we see that, we can basically and very accurately measure, how tall your grass is, but that's not one of the things that we like to talk about. We don't want to tell people to have to cut their grass, but please cut your grass. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So our next item of business is the ethics and the Planning Commission, a local primer. And again, as I explained on the email, this is the first of a series of topics that we had discussed last month, that we had discussed beginning of the year. And if you recollect, we discussed some years back when we did that self-study and said, what can we do in ways to not just improve our ability to do our job, but help cultivate the faith of the community and town council and our ability to do that. So this isn't designed to preach to anybody, and it certainly isn't responding to any particular situation or circumstance, just a refresher in some cases, but also just there's some great information I thought in the material that you handed out that really got me thinking on how to kind of keep this always in the back of our mind as we're deliberating and making decisions on behalf of the public. So we're going to begin with just a quick overview or underscoring of some of the key concepts from Mr. Pambid. Then we'll kind of break it down and talk about it in terms of some of the topics, and if necessary, we have some hypothetical situations that we can explore. But again, kind of looking to try to keep this within a reasonable time frame. So without further ado, Mr. Pambid, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. So the staff had put together all of this material at the commission's request, and we sent that out with your preliminary agenda 3 weeks ago. I didn't want to give you just 1 week to go over the information, because ethics is it's a very meaty topic, and there's a lot to unpack there. But what we're really talking about here is something that we deal with every day. But again, getting back to the origins of the discussion, of course, this is my 4th month here, and one of the very first concepts that I was introduced to by John and by the rest of you, the Planning Commission, is that in your 2021 goals and your 2022 goals, it was something that you wanted to have was a professional development program. So last meeting, you listed some of the things that you wanted to see in that. Ethics was one of them. And so we get a lot of material from, from academic materials and coursework. Those of you who have gone through the Certified Planning Commissioner course, there is a module on ethics. There are also professional and organizational standards of conduct. So if you're a member of the Real Estate Association, there's probably a code of conduct. If there is a, for those of us who are professional planners, we've got, the American Institute of Certified Planners, or the AICP code of conduct and professional standards. Almost every professional, or almost every profession has got an organization that has codes of conduct or codes or standards of conduct. So with that being said, again, we provided that material to you, just pulled from different sources. However, we are not experts on ethics. Again, there's a lot to unpack there, and one of the other things is we feel that it would be better if this was a commission-driven discussion. Certainly, we can do a little bit of leading from the staff perspective, but that's what the slides are for. I've got 8 slides, and then I've got 4 additional slides for hypotheticals if you want to chew on that. But again, what we're talking about is applied ethics. We make daily decisions, and we base those decisions on values and experience. But what we're not here to do is we're not here to discuss theory or philosophy. We're not getting that deep, but there are certain things that across the board we see often, things like conflict of interest, confidentiality. That's the level that we want to talk about ethics or discuss. So The reason why we want to discuss that, public officials, again, we do have a great responsibility, and therefore the expectations and scrutiny are greater. We've got people who come into this chamber, we've got people who listen online. Our discussions and our decisions are monitored by the public, and they're written about in the newspaper and reported in the media. So these are the things that we need to consider, making sure that we are performing our due diligence and that we're making proper and defensible decisions. So again, why talk about ethics? John mentioned it right off the bat. Public trust is important. What we want to do through our discussions and through our deliberations and decisions is we want to elevate governance. We don't want to degrade it. So we want people to trust us when we make these decisions. We do have a responsibility to each other as colleagues and to our community. People expect us to make proper and correct decisions and to, essentially behave the right way. Ethics set standards. And probably just as importantly, perception is just as important as reality. So if people perceive that there's, I guess, an ethical miscarriage or improper action or something like that, even if there wasn't, then once that's gotten out into the community, it's kind of hard to put back in the box, or it's hard to correct. So again, when we talk about perception as reality, we can also talk about the legality versus the appropriateness of a decision. Those are two different things. Again, some of the provided materials for the people who are listening online, the staff did provide some materials. We provided the Planning Commission, the American Planning Association, Ethical Principles in Planning. These are for all stakeholders, decision makers, advocates involved in the planning process. It's not the same as the AICP Code of Ethics, which is specifically for professional planners. We provided the Planning Commission with a couple of articles, and we also provided the Town Employee Handbook, which has some ethical and code of conduct type statements in there. So again, ethical standards for planners, code of ethics for professional planners. I think I might have duplicated this slide because I feel like I just said this, but again, other public administration and management standards. So there are a couple of public administration organizations. When you read the ethical principles in planning or the AICP Code of Ethics, a lot of them read kind of similarly. We do have standards for employees and officials. You, as planning commissioners, are town officials. So the information kind of at the local and state level that's geared more towards us here in Virginia. Number one, we do have the Town of Farmville Employee Handbook. When it talks about ethical behavior and code of conduct, I do want to read this out loud for the listening audience, but there are 4 of them. Number 1, build trust through honesty and transparency. Number 2, seek no personal gain. Number 3, treat everyone fairly. And number 4, build the community through good financial stewardship. And I want to highlight those because that's language that came from the community and from the town. That's not something that was handed down from on high that says this is how you shall behave. So this was something that the town staff had put together. It's in the Farmville Employee Handbook. And I would suggest that what's in our employee handbook could also be applicable to to you as town officials and to the town council. Now, with that being said, there is also the handbook for Virginia mayors and council members, and it's a book about 1.5 inches thick, but it's got a lot of good information in there that goes basically from A to Z, the operations of a town, so finance, public works, planning, airports, bus systems, things of that sort. But there's also a section in there about conflicts of interest. I do want to talk about quickly throw out there the 3 general types of improper actions. So you've got malfeasance, which is an act which a person ought not to do at all. Misfeasance, which is an improper act that a person might lawfully do. So again, I mentioned the legality versus the appropriateness of an act. Misfeasance. Nonfeasance is the omission of an act that a person ought to do. So if there's something that a person was supposed to do but they didn't do it, that's nonfeasance. They didn't act. Typical local government scenarios, again, confidentiality, that's more of a privacy issue. Conflicts of interest deal with, are you involved in a decision where you might financially gain? Ex parte communications is an important one. That's an issue of transparency. So for people who don't know what ex parte communications is, let's say, for example, you've got a development proposal that you're going to be acting on, and the applicant comes up to you at the grocery store and starts asking you questions about that application. That's an improper thing to try to respond. So you can, politely and diplomatically respond that you're not able to discuss that in a setting where the rest of the public doesn't have access to the same information that you just got. Public interest versus personal opinions or values is number 4. So who essentially are you representing when you're discussing an application or you're discussing an issue? Certainly you have to strike that balance between how you personally feel about an issue versus what's really good for the community. And these 4 types of scenarios are actually listed in the articles that I provided to you. So certainly refer to those articles if you've got further questions. The next slides are about the scenarios, but I think I want to, at this time, turn it back over to the chair to maybe lead you in a discussion on what you've heard so far and what you've read so far based on the materials.
Thank you, sir. That's a great overview and a great clarification of those 3 things. I like that legality versus appropriateness of a situation. But yeah, this was the 4 things that Mr. Pam had, the common situations, and that the book chapter that he shared with us, appropriately titled Behavior Cells, discussed. And yeah, I thought we'd just kind of tick them off. A couple seem pretty straightforward. A couple seem to be, some interesting gray areas, especially given the size of our community. But anyone have any thoughts or kind of questions about confidentiality? Kind of, circumstances or situations that, that we may have encountered, or things that, we may need to be more cognizant of.
At the staff level, we deal with confidentiality all the time.
Right.
And this may trigger some thoughts from a commission standpoint, but if someone comes to me with, with an application that they're considering maybe locating a large economic development prospect and they want us to sign non-disclosure agreements, we have to keep that confidential until the appropriate time. My rule of thumb when it comes to confidentiality, especially pertaining to development proposals, is if they haven't submitted an application for it, then it's not official, and I won't comment on it publicly. So there are certain instances where there's like the worst kept secret in town where everybody thinks they know about it, but from our perspective, it's not official until there's been an application that can be FOIA'd, or Freedom of Information Act. I can't release working notes, for example. So if I'm taking notes on something that obviously I need to process but can't talk about, things like working notes aren't FOIAble, but that's one instance where the staff deals with confidentiality. Unofficial inquiries happen every single day. Someone calls me up on the phone and says, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, or I want to do that. To me, that's unofficial. Complainants, some people, they want to remain confidential. That's kind of a touchy situation as to whether, if someone says, hey, my next door neighbor's got a colony of feral cats next door, and we or whatever. But I don't want to be that neighbor who is ratting out my next door neighbor. You know, to me, that kind of gets a little bit touchy, but that's one instance where I have to think about confidentiality a lot. So those are just two instances, and maybe you've got some, you know, some statements or some opinions on confidentiality after that.
I mean, I would assume that, you know, documents that come to us from your office, I mean, those are public, you know, documents that we're able to share out that info. What's an example of a moment where we might, as a group, need to keep confidentiality? Or
Right. I think that what applies to the staff could potentially apply to the Planning Commission as well. You know, I think about any situation where you think that privacy might be warranted, you know, even some delicate handling of a certain situation. Again, if it looks like that everybody knows about it, but there hasn't been anything official, I honestly wouldn't try to perpetuate that rumor, you know, try to find out a little bit more about it. You know, again, there's probably not so, you can only go so far in trying to find out about that if there isn't anything officially on the record. But again, I think that, again, what applies to the staff could also apply to the commission.
We can still go into closed session if we are discussing a particular property or something that's financial related to that or personnel. Is that correct?
There are certain situations where a body could go into closed session. I don't have the specific rules for the Planning Commission. Planning Commission typically doesn't go into closed session unless it's for a deposition of some sort. I've gone through a couple of instances like that, but personnel matters, that's probably going to be reserved more for the governing body as opposed to the Planning Commission.
we've
Right.
gone into closed session once since I've been here regarding a particular project to receive some clarifying information.
And there are very clear rules for going into closed session for public bodies, and if that's something that you want us to get back to you on, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, he gave us an opinion related to a project, and we were very clear on what we could, that we were only in session to talk about that. You couldn't bring anything else to the conversation.
That's one way that we can go ahead and if there's something sensitive that, I'd like to see a list, if we have one, of what we can go into closed session for. Thank you.
I was just going to say real quick, and I'm trying to make sure that I don't give away the information or say information that would have been private. But I do remember an instance when when we were doing the comprehensive plan and looking at information in the Northern Gateway here in town where it wasn't included in the plan, and I was like, I think we should have it there. And I had to go around. I was talking to different businesses, understanding or asking ideas. And a couple pieces of information that I got in talking with the business owners in the area were issues with business owners next to them. And the best thing I could do was to bring that to staff, basically, not go to the other business owner and try and handle something. But in just talking about this, that was the best example I can think that I've run into where it might be a privacy thing. But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to take it upon myself as a commissioner if I were going to go look at a piece of property and go over to the neighbor's door and knock and say, hey, what do you think about this? That would be a confidentiality and privacy, potentially some issues that might come up there. So other than making my own assessment or judgment of what's going on. And I've thought twice I've had to get out of my vehicle to look at a piece of property. And I've thought, what if somebody walks up to me right now and starts asking questions like what I'm doing? Like, what am I going to say to them? So I don't know. Those are probably the ones that were coming up in my mind or queuing in my mind as we're talking about it. But
I mean, that's kind of a good question. Kind of harkens back to, I think, what Cam was asking. By the time stuff gets to us to, begin thinking about this to make a recommendation to council, and, Jerry goes out, or any of us go out and take a look at a property just to kind of put eyeballs on it for ourselves, and someone asks, what are you doing? I mean, I guess by that point in time, it'd be public information and foilable, right? So Jerry could say, hey, I'm a member of the planning commission, and I'm just, researching. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, I'd say that would be acceptable. To me, that's not as much a confidentiality issue as it would be an ex parte communications issue. If someone walked up to you and started asking you, what are you doing here, and that kind of thing, what you want to be very careful not to do is to discuss it too much. You're there to gather your own information. You're not there to, make decisions and that kind of thing. And I think that's where people get kind of twitchy, is that, a commissioner goes out there and starts talking with people, and other people don't have the benefit of the information that commissioner got because it wasn't done in an open manner. That's where you really want to be careful. But certainly, the planning commissioners are expected to go out and to look at sites if it is a development proposal, and to understand a little bit more from that perspective, from a physical perspective. It's the discussion that really could get you in trouble. Yeah.
And actually, I like to use that as an opportunity, because I think that's where it gets kind of, to me, a little sticky looking at, some of the guidance and the materials we're given. And so if people are comfortable, unless they want to talk more about conflicts of interest, I've always thought that, we've been very diligent about, or avoiding those, and when those have come up, people have excused themselves, or if necessary, have read the statements that Gary's prepared for us. So does anyone want to talk about conflict of interest, or do people want to kind of jump to the ex parte, which seems kind of more relevant to us in a small town? Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
I think this is probably the best time to talk briefly about it. So I know this is talking about personal conflicts of interest, but in going through some of the material, and it's funny, so proffers, I understand, aren't allowed, and this is a perfect time to be able to talk about this because there's not an active case where we might need to be talking about a proffer. But I had heard the comment that that's not even something that can be done legally now anyway. And so I did some research, and the best or closest I could find was like information from 2017 in Albemarle County. They still have written into their code that proffers are something that can be done. They can't be solicited by I'm assuming this would be Charlottesville then, but it's something that can be done. So do you have any information just talking about that? Because I know it's not a personal conflict of interest, but I know that gets into a really gray area of when's that something that would even come up for us to have to think about? Or, I mean, how will we talk about that as a commission if that's comes up in conversation from a developer, for instance? They're like, we'll do this and blah, blah, blah. So.
Sure. So proffers, I would say, are kind of outside of the realm of what we're talking about here in terms of ethics. But to clear the air on proffers are still legal in Virginia. There are some places that do cash proffers. I think maybe what you heard was you can't extract cash proffers from, in certain situations. But proffers are basically introduced during a rezoning application. And the purpose of the proffers is really for the developer to kind of stipulate certain things that would make the decision more palatable to the planning commission, to the adjacent property owners, other stakeholders, certainly to the town council. So you can have these monetary or cash proffers, or proffers for, we'll deed this property to the town for a fire station because we're adding, 700 houses or something like that. I don't think that from what I understand, the town has a lot of experience dealing with proffers. Usually it's just a straight rezoning from, okay, we want to go from R1 to B2 or whatever. And I think that to do that without the benefit of proffers, which could potentially protect the, adjacent property owners, there's various ways to do proffers, but that in and of itself could be a separate workshop or discussion. Yeah, but that's something that we could certainly bring in other folks, but I understand your question. You're kind of looking forward to the time where there is a rezoning that comes in. How do you have that conversation? And it really depends on the situation too. Are we talking about residential, or are we talking about, going from agricultural to residential, or from residential to business? I guess the depth of that conversation really depends on the situation, and it's really a difficult thing to discuss in the short amount of time that we've got.
Yeah, so I can appreciate that. Maybe it's something that we could talk about in a little more depth. And maybe we won't run into it, but I can tell you, thinking back on a couple situations, if that would have come about, I would have been very unprepared and uncomfortable to be able to talk about it. So I think it's something we probably should discuss, at least on surface level, what as a commission we would be responsible for. Would it be something that would have to have already gone through staff and some understanding of what's coming about? So, yeah, I can appreciate that. It's probably a 2-hour conversation plus some, a book of notes and understanding what can and can't be done anyway. But yeah, so I'm sorry but that was the best place I could think to even, because it's for whatever reason, reading through everything queued me up to go, I want to ask about this. So.
One thing with proffers that I've run into is that a lot of the developers that want to come here don't, because it's already so expensive because of the water and sewer rates and the cost for other infrastructures, the towns, the streets, the curbing. So if you add on proffers, and I'm talking about current times, you're already going to send developers away. Sometimes the town almost needs to present some proffers because of what the developers are having to incur when they come here. It's just gotten too expensive. I've had one that just left because the water and the sewer were too expensive for him. So I don't know if Farmville's ready for asking for getting proffers to be accepted by developers. Everything's just so expensive for them right now, but it is good to know what they're all about.
Well, I will mention this about proffers, and if we could get back to the material at hand. But one thing about proffers, again, they are intended to address certain situations about a specific development proposal. One thing that we should not be doing is just doing a speculative rezoning. I want to rezone my property from R1 to B3 because it's going to increase my property values and I can make it more marketable. I don't believe in that. When they have a development proposal in hand, that's when I feel is the appropriate time to do a rezoning. Now, with that being said, that's how you get better development. Because we've got a pretty good zoning ordinance, but there are some things about the development standards that, if you're looking for higher quality development, someone could come in with, for instance, vinyl when brick or stone might be more appropriate. Then you get, that might be one way or one thing that you would get a proffer on, is that the developer could proffer a certain appearance of development, or maybe they need a connection to a walking trail or something like that. Again, there are just so many different scenarios when it comes to proffers that we could talk all night about that. And if you want more information on that, we'd be happy to put a slide deck together on that. Again, I've said this already, there's a lot to unpack with every question that gets asked.
Yeah, let's look at doing something in the summertime about that. That might be good. Yeah. So unless there's other questions or comments about conflicts of interest, let's jump to ex parte. But again, if anyone wants to talk about more conflicts of interest. But yeah, if you take a look at page 208 in the Citizen's Guide to Planning, that was the chapter, titled Behave Yourself, page 208. They list 4 examples or scenarios of ex parte contacts, and some of those seem pretty apparent. Touring a site with an applicant seems pretty taboo. Meetings with an applicant, as Lee pointed out, that seems pretty egregious. But there was, a couple, and again, maybe it's just kind of the nature of the community that we live in, where, I've had people who felt pretty comfortable calling me up, especially opponents to a project, saying, this is how I feel, about this, and, kind of expecting me to listen to it. And whereas I think most people would say it's probably pretty inappropriate to meet with a neighborhood group about an application. Sometimes neighborhoods and neighborhood groups meet, and the topic comes up, and all of a sudden you're kind of the fly on the wall, but you're and then also the one which just seems kind of hopelessly impossible here in Farmville, encountering people at a grocery store or church who take the opportunity to give you their opinion about a pending application. So I guess I just wanted to hear if my experience is unique in that, if other people experience that, and what should we do and what should we say?
Yeah. I was surprised to see this because when we've had more controversial things come before us is when I have had people call me and say, this is my opinion on this, and want to talk about it. And I kind of feel like, okay, if I'm representing the community, I should be listening to what they feel about it. So I was very surprised to see this. But it makes sense, and it would be great to have more people come do that at a public hearing, though we've had some public hearings where a lot of people have done that. It's been interesting.
Well, and we put our contact info online for folks to be able to reach out. So, I mean, I've always felt that it's a responsibility. It's okay to listen. It's never appropriate to make promises or to go deep into whatever thoughts you might have in the moment. But it's important to listen, because listening might inform the decision that you make down the road.
Yeah,
I
that
think
seems
it's
to be a pretty
different.
reasonable posture.
It's a different thing to listen to a citizen than it is to listen to someone that's put the application in.
Yeah, I think Cameron just said basically what to me, I've always felt like it's one thing to listen. It's a different thing with how you respond to it and how in-depth you go with what you may feel or your opinion or anything like that. That's how I've always tried to handle certain situations, especially with town. Even business to some degree is that way, but certainly with public work is I've learned that quickly, that people want a lot more information than I'm willing to talk about, and I just kind of leave it at that usually. So, but yeah, I think we're gonna get emails, we're gonna get somebody approach us, certainly when there's hot topics and things going on in town that quite a few people know about. Yeah.
I think one paragraph that I would point out in response to both Jerry and Cam is on page 209. That second to the last paragraph down there kind of talks about the role of the planning commissioner versus the role of the staff planner versus the role of the voting or deciding governing body member. So I guess conceptually, there is the expectation that the planning commission would base its deliberations on fact and the facts of the case. it's really up to the council to make that political decision. So the planning commission, again, conceptually should be apolitical in its deliberations and certainly taking an opinion. And I agree with you that you have to listen to a certain point, but also consider what the role of the planning commissioner is to make that factual recommendation to the to the town council.
In other words, you're saying public opinion can factor into it, but by and large, we're looking at the facts of zoning ordinances and the comprehensive plan and that type of stuff.
Zoning ordinances, comprehensive plans certainly factor into that, but then you've also got your infrastructure piece. There's a lot of data involved or potentially involved in, and again, there's a hypothetical, but what I call the NIMBY playbook. They want to complain about traffic, complain about noise, dust, light, all these other things, but then they don't bring any data with them to support that. If you're going to do that, then be factual. So yeah, you can make that assertion anecdotally, but I would challenge the planning commission to not necessarily take that at face value and to see exactly what it is that you're being told and to understand a little bit more. Well, that sounds more like opinion or an unsubstantiated assertion versus, hey, these people really did their research and they're bringing us some facts.
And the other thing on 209 I liked as well that they pointed out was, and I agree, like listening carefully and saying thank you, but encouraging people to come and share those, whether they be opinions or hopefully whether they be informed opinions at a public hearing as well. I know some people are a little bit skeptical about sharing their opinions in public. Other thoughts on ex parte communications and transparency? So if nothing, let's talk about public interest and personal versus personal opinions or values in terms of who we're representing. And that's was kind of on page 10 and 11. And again, I thought some of the some of these questions that are asked, especially on page 211, where it's not even so much kind of personal interest sometimes, and it's not even so much kind of like a direct conflict, a tangible conflict, but as Lee pointed out, it's this kind of perception of the conflict. And it says, should you ask themselves, a citizen should ask themselves two questions when invited to join a board or commission. Can I act in a fair and unbiased manner as a government official in light of my history involvement in planning issues? And I thought that was the more significant of the two. Given the fact that some of us, as also the chapter points out, that some of us are, either inclined to serve on this commission or, invited to serve on this commission because we do have expertise in affordable housing, because, represent a constituency of, realtors and developers that have experience or background in that. Or, can we, if we're asked to, vote on something related to our employer or a big employer, to what degree, should we think about it, or how do we kind of manage this? I didn't know if people felt comfortable about talking about that or kind of sharing about things that, that have been come up in past, or if we've heard anything. I'll throw it out. I remember, Patrick had to recuse himself when, again, just not coming up about any particular thing, but when we had that issue related to Spotswood, Patrick had to recuse himself because of the perception. I remember when Longwood was wanting to do the two things with Johns and Moss, Cam, you and I had to, talk with Gary and with Scott about, criteria about whether or not, since we are employees of Longwood, was it be appropriate for us to vote on that? And we decided, given the length of our employment, given the size of the institution, and that we wouldn't directly benefit, that, we felt comfortable that we could do that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I've had the same question, and I know because I do have expertise in affordable housing, but I also, that's where I make my living. I mean, I'm employed by an organization that's, our focus. So, yeah, I've wondered about that too. I mean, we haven't had anything come for this body that's, pertains specifically to Habitat or any projects we're doing, but it could very well happen at some point, so.
I mean,
Well, I was just going to say, I kind of think as I look at that public interest versus personal opinion or values, and I think what Lee was saying about, looking at the data and the regulations that we need to be following, and that kind of makes you put aside your personal opinions, if you can remember to do that and not get tied up in your personal emotions that sometimes come into it, so.
One thing that I think of when we had the Martin property that we were discussing, and we had 11 to 15 people that would attend these meetings, that sometimes we forget that there are 15 or so people that attend that are either pro or against something, but there are 9,000 more people that do not attend and either are pro or against a project. And we have to keep in mind that we have to represent those people too that aren't in here and vocalizing their opinion. And that bothers me sometimes when I feel like sometimes we're expected to listen to the squeaky wheel, but we sometimes forget those others that don't come. They can't get here, they don't know what's going on maybe. But I think that's something that we have to pay particular attention to, is the people that don't come. And just because there is one vocal group that attends, we need to also listen to these people that don't attend and keep that in mind as well.
I mean, I think if we kind of get back to the core of what was said about the difference between the planning commission, the role of the staff, and the role of the governing body, if we're sticking to the facts that are before us, then a lot of that isn't for us to consider. I mean, that, we're the facts. I mean, sometimes I think the public can offer tidbits of info that might inform your thought, but I think if we're just sticking to the facts, I think sometimes you can kind of put other things like that to the side.
And I think that's going to require some education of the public on what we do as well. And their kind of understanding of our role and what our criteria are versus, say, town council and staff, but town council especially.
I want us to be a group that works to deliver council the best informed recommendation that we possibly can. I mean, and I think if we do that well, it kind of helps them when they're the ones that have to make the final call.
I think that sometimes when the public gives us statistics or their professional information, that it is incorrect. I've followed up on some that was given to us at one public hearing, and it was incorrect, but we don't know that as a group until it's over and we can research it and our vote's already been made or taken. So I think, in line with what Cam says, I think it's important that we do make the public as well as ourselves informed as to what is fact and what is not fact. Just because the public might say it is doesn't mean it is.
And I don't I just don't know if that's our role to be focused on that. I mean, their opinion and their thought is going to be what it is. You know, that's why they get the opportunity to deliver and bring that before us. And I think we're the ones that have to take that in and decide how it's going to impact what we do.
Yeah, I was just going to say there is a fine line between promoting open communication and, you know, of course, I don't want to hear from somebody who's, you know, throwing out random stuff that I know is not right or whatever. Of course, I don't. And the same thing, I don't want to hear somebody that's being rude to somebody else is sitting in here. I don't want to, but there is a fine line between promoting open communication and wanting. I mean, if you take the time out of your schedule to attend a meeting, simply tells me that you do care and how you want to spin the story or the facts or make them look how they fit you. I think that is for us to look into and figure out and go research. And if we cause pause to ask for something to be tabled or be moved back or have a second meeting. But Cameron, I completely agree with what you say. Like, this is something to me that has seemed relatively straightforward when you look at the zoning and the way that it's in place. Usually that's on the side of that's what's in place currently. If we're going to change it, there's got to be something that either matches the vision that's part of the comprehensive plan and doesn't impact others around. I know in the case, in one of the larger cases that we were, you know, talking about for a long period of time, I played devil's advocate for a long time to convince myself that my opinion wasn't, I was trying to get my opinion out of it to make sure that I had done all the research to make sure that, yes, this is the proper decision on this. But yeah, a lot of it to me is, at the end of the day, it does show if somebody comes to a meeting, I want to know what they have to say, and I want the open communication. I think we should be promoting that, even if they have a weird spin on their version of it. I think that's for us to figure out. But at the end of the day, it does come down to we have a code to follow, and the you know, it's pretty straightforward at the end of the day to me to make the right decision. Sometimes you just have to take time to look into it and research it. So it's not like we're voting on the president of the United States and there's a whole lot of opinion in that. So, yeah.
Lee, you got any thoughts or experience on kind of how to balance? I mean, we have public hearings for a reason to communicate, but how do we, you know, like what's the kind of the professional, conventional wisdom, or what's your experiences, recommendations?
Sure, and I haven't heard anything tonight that would be considered just completely outside of the, you know, beyond the pale or outside of the boundaries of reason. But from a staff perspective, I'm always asking for more information, better information. Show me your sources. Show me your math. If you're going to bring me, numbers, then show me your math. Bring the receipts. You know what I'm saying? I need to understand where you're coming from, and I need to understand that it's true and that it's valid. So, and there are no stupid questions when it comes to getting more information. Does it take more time? Certainly. Does it take more effort on behalf of the applicant? Sure, but if their application's worth it and if they really want it, then they'll provide it. And again, we're not asking for anything arbitrary and capricious. I mean, certainly that's not what I'm espousing as the staff or as the director. We're not asking for information just to ask for it, but again, I want some level of comfort that what people are bringing to me is accurate and true. And if I want to see how you arrived at a certain conclusion, then I'm going to ask you, show me how you got here. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
That's all I'm asking, because I don't think we sometimes get that. Thank you.
But I will say, I guess now that we have the new comprehensive plan, the new zoning ordinances in place, and it's a lot more clear cut, a little bit more, for lack of a better term, comprehensive. You know, it's, other thoughts on the public interest versus personal opinions or values, or kind of the appearance thereof on who we represent? I mean, I think it's just a kind of a good, it was on the agenda, but I think it's a question that it's been percolating in the back of our minds. I'm glad it got brought up. Yeah. Other thoughts? What about other ethics kind of issues that might not be represented in these 4 categories right here? I mean, Jay brought the proffers, and that's something that we ought to maybe address in more depth at a separate occasion, but are there other things that have kind of, people like,
Yeah, there are a couple of other, well, one other that was kind of covered in the material is like the receipt of gifts. You know, when that developer brings that tin of peanut butter brittle to the staff, you know, is that improper? It's like, well, no, not unless you, I mean, if you share with everybody, then that's fine. But of course, there are some other just outright egregious situations, such as bribery. No one's going to confuse a tin of butter toffee or whatever with kickback or something like that. So that's something that I've never had happen. No one's ever offered me a flat out bribe, but there are certainly different levels of that. Going out with a developer and they offer to pay for lunch. You know, again, there's different severities of that, but that's one situation that might fall under conflict of interest. But in the material, it was actually a separate bullet point. Yeah.
I heard the World Heritage Site bought Cam's new minivan for him. Yeah, that's good. I guess we're fortunate. I've never been approached by anything, or yeah.
Well, I will say in business I have, but it's usually more subtle than you would expect it to be. So I haven't that I can think of with the town or anything with public service, but I have in business, and it's usually more subtle than you would think it is. But they know what they're up to. I can guarantee you that.
Other thoughts or comments or observations? This is
I will
good.
say, I'm sorry. One of the things that I thought about when I was reading through this is, remember when we found out that there were not supposed to be more than 3 of us together at the same time in the same place or something like that? And I just wondered, are there any more kind of like regulations for how we're supposed to conduct ourselves that maybe we don't know about because we just, are we doing something wrong unintentionally, I guess is what I was thinking. Because there have been times when there have been many of us who worked at the same place. Would we be in violation if we were all at the faculty meeting together, something like that? But
I think it's only if you're discussing commission business.
Yeah, there's a maximum number of, Abby, you're right. Only 3 of you, or only 2 of you can legally get together and discuss something. If there's 3 of you that get together and you start discussing the same topic, then you're holding a meeting. So.
But that's a topic related to the planning commission, not like the Washington football team or nothing like that. Right? Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. Public meeting rules, there are specific regulations. You're exactly right on that. And if you want more information, we can certainly provide you the rules and regulations on that.
yeah, just
I
wanna
wouldn't,
make
I
sure
wouldn't
I'm-
consider, I wouldn't consider that an ethical issue though, unless you intentionally try
Right,
to, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just want to make sure that we're not unintentionally doing things that we shouldn't be doing, that's all, you know?
But I think
Ignorance is no excuse, that's all.
it does fall under the gray area of avoiding a situation that could appear having the appearance. Then I think that's what you're after, but yeah. It's like if I have a backyard party and invite, 25 people and 4 of them have to be planning commissioners, like, well, there's quite a few people there that can attest that we weren't sitting around in a circle talking about, but it still is the appearance, or can have the appearance, so I know what you mean. And it is kind of a dicey, a little bit dicey, so.
John, I've got a couple of scenarios. If you want to put a nice little bow on it, we can try to entertain ourselves with what if.
It's 8:20. Are people feeling pretty comfortable and confident with our discussion? Okay. Jay?
A lot of it is common sense.
It's common sense, but I think it's, as we're talking about, it's perception. And sometimes it's, even when we're doing what we think that we're supposed to do, and there's some kind of things that we may not know about sunshine rules, but there's also, you're right, like, if people kind of see us out there, or, sometimes it's kind of unintentional. So yeah, I thought this has been a pretty good briefing that has kind of addressed some of the topics, but has expanded into other relevant topics. So I'm comfortable with wrapping it up, unless you think there's areas of or dimensions or ramifications that we haven't considered.
Now, I think that you guys have accomplished your mission for the night. And you can certainly, I feel like that you can certainly check that off of your professional development plan and your 2022 goals. But ethics, that's something that you always want to be evaluating, especially on a case-by-case basis. Is ethical decision-making common sense? I think to a certain point. It might not be common sense to everybody. Again, everyone's ethics and morality for that matter, that's all formed by your own personal experiences, values, what you've been taught, how you've been raised, life experiences. So some of it is common sense, but there is a certain amount of deliberate decision-making and deliberate thought that goes into making a proper ethical decision. So, if there's ever a doubt, and this was in the primer, take a pause and think about it. And if you still have questions, then confide in somebody else. Mm-hmm.
Bless you.
Well, thank you very much for organizing this. We appreciate that, and thank you, everybody, for your candor, and, for the good questions and comments. Is there any other items of interest or any other further business?
I have to flip through the scenarios to get to the other slide, but just really quickly, we do have some things to think about. I will provide these to you so that you can continue to think about them on your own. Okay. But you've got a couple of scenarios that were taken from the national conference, and I just went ahead and put them up here. So. Again, I just had to get to this. I had to go through the scenarios to get to this slide here. So carry on, sir.
Yeah. If there's any further business? Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So move.
Second?
Okay. By voice acclamation, all those in favor of adjourning the meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, y'all.
Thank y'all.
With that being said, we will have